panel is on new technology and innovations. And the moderator is Tulio Scacciati.
Okay, I'm Tulio Scacciati. I'll give you a little bit of my background, and then I'll let everybody else introduce themselves. I started in the oil and gas industry about 20 years ago, doing private equity in midstream, natural gas pipelines, peak shaving plants, and gas distribution. Then moved to power generation with Exelon, doing strategy. We did commercial transactions, and then I moved to GE, doing oil and gas equipment, mergers and acquisitions and strategy, and then moved with Weir Oil and Gas and Dallas, Fort Worth, and did also strategy, marketing, and M&A. So I have more of a strategic view of the oil field services and the oil and gas industry, and have lately worked with the ADI group and other customers on IoT technologies and predictive analytics and a little bit of this data analytics trend. I'll let each one of the panel to introduce themselves. They have a few slides. I'll put the slides for you so you can start with that, and then we'll have a few Q&A at the end. So, Howard.
So, Håvard Ivold. I'm 34 years with ABB, most of them in the oil and gas industry, in Norway, where I'm based, but also Europe, Middle East, and over here. I worked most of the time with technology development in the automation and energy sector. And I come to like disruptive technologies, new energies actually. So if I said what I wanted about the last half hour, I might be taken out of here by men in black suits, I guess. But I'll talk a little bit about that. Now I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Oil and Gas in ABB, and also the Country Technology Manager of ABB Norway. And I thought I would say a few words about digitalization as a theme. It's been touched by several other presenters here today. But just to start, we see two megatrends affecting our part of the industry. And one is in what is in Europe called the fourth energy industrial revolution, Industri 4.0, and also the energy revolution, characterized on one side by automation, robotization, digitalization, and on the energy side by a more and more competitive energy landscape, where alternative renewable energies, we talked about some of them, solar, wind, water, bioenergy, even advanced forms of nuclear energy, is creating a very competitive landscape around this. And I see it not so much driven directly by the environmental concerns, although that is a big driver around the world, but simply because the competition is getting better. It was mentioned here, batteries, solar power, and everything else. And they are simply beating us as oil and gas, if I take that attitude. And that means that you can choose, like Neo does when he gets these pills from Mobius in the Matrix, right? To take the blue one, you go to bed, you wake up next morning, everything is as it used to be, right? Oil price is $100, gas price goes back to $10 because an increasing energy demand is driving the market up. Or you can take the red one and you see what happens. And we believe that you should be prepared. I mean, anyone that simply ignores the development is not going to be resilient in the face of change. You need to stay competitive, and it shows that even if the legislation allows you to relax or to drive what you're doing in a less than optimum way, the long-term competitiveness suffers anyway. So these things has a tendency to correct themselves no matter what. this thing we call digitalization today, and of course, you can't be a CEO today and make a board report without saying digitalization every fifth sentence. And it might not be that many people who really know what they are talking about, really about these things. It's been called smart energy, digital oil fields, smart well, and things like that over the last 20 years almost. The difference now is that we see a complete transformation of the way the sharpest among us do business, from the very edge, the components, the measuring devices, and up to the top-level management, the fleet management, and the company management here. And I got these two slides from McKinsey. We had a workshop with them 14 days ago. They identified areas of change in the oil and gas industry and the value potential. And without going through all that, because I've only got 10 minutes, the value potential is tremendous. You ask yourself what people are complaining about when they have an untapped cost reduction of 25% of the industry in these technologies. What they consist of, we can go through later if anyone are interested. And I say that based on what we see today, we can more or less go straight out and take out about 12% of that now. So why isn't this happening, right? If you can reduce production, if you can increase production, on a well by say an average of 4%, it doesn't sound like a lot, right? But if you spend a few $100,000 and you get 4% up across 25 wells, that's equivalent to one well. And in the offshore market I work, that course costs $40–50 million to drill. And instead you could spend $3–4 million to realize the same production. And some companies are doing that. And 2/3 of the companies are not necessarily there yet. And you can ask yourself why. So what we and others are doing, you will probably find this from every control company and even a few more, is to build a base of connectivity, cybersecurity, and so on, to build on that some form of collaborative technology, because the dream of everyone is, of course, to sell services, to sell some kind of service on top of the hardware that people want to apply, in terms of well productivity, facility optimization, energy efficiency, maintenance management, or something like that. So that's obviously what ABB is doing as well, calling it ABB Ability. And it's based on own technology, and it's based on Microsoft technology and other partners. So the idea about this is to find a way to operate better, to see changes, to see trends in the process, looking for small signs of water breakthroughs, looking for small changes of the well production profile. What is happening in the process? Are we getting scaling? Are we getting erosion? Are we getting other problems in the process? And be able to tackle that before it happens. We want to see with maintenance, and that was described earlier today. But contrary to the belief, the standards in the industry here is really rotten, right? We actually do 50% more maintenance that is required. And when we do maintenance, about 50% of that introduce additional errors that will come back to cause process shutdowns later on. I mean, if you replace a fuel pump on that gas turbine that you talked about earlier, that little gear thing that couples the fuel pump to the shaft, that was operating very happily. You know, it is worn in, it's operating, right? If you go ahead and change it, you are introducing additional wear in that little element, which will cause the next pump to fail earlier than it should have done. Things like that, right? And I don't have time for all these examples, but to take these little indicators that we get and translate them into not doing maintenance before it's needed, to extend equipment operating time by 30, 40, 50% perhaps, and avoid in-operation failures is of course both a safety issue and a cost issue. And even more dramatic, but because this was just point solutions before, this should go in and affect how you operate the company. You know, look at the workforce, get all the HR data in, get all the project records in, get all the purchases and procurements and supplier data in, and look at it in a bad way, in an overall way, right? To see, is there a problem with specific types of equipment from specific vendors? Are some of our teams having more complaints or more negative feedback than others? And why is that? Is it because of their experience base, of their training, of their gender even? For all I care, probably we shouldn't talk about that. Is it because we do more on-site maintenance and less remote maintenance? Really, what's happening here? And we use it also for financial forecasting, right? Rather than just relying on the organization to accumulate data back on order intake and revenues and so on, we see, so what's happening with our customers? What's happening with our peers in the industry? And how can we bring all that data that we see around us into a common forecasting algorithm that say that, why should we trust our operating units if they predict a hockey stick towards the end of the year, when we see a negative trend with all our competitors in the industry? That's not very likely. So that's another way of using all this data. So that was just some examples. Thank you for the introduction.
And I think I'm up next. So I'm Jim Sledzik, and with Energy Ventures, I run the North America operations here. And I've just got about 4 slides to cover to kind of introduce or set the scene on what Energy Ventures does and why it's relevant for natural gas specifically. So with this slide right there, I always like to ask the question of the audience. When you look at that slide, and just by a show of hands, if you could raise your hand, do you believe that that is a sunrise coming up? Anybody? Sunrise? Who's sunrise?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Okay, great. And who believes that's a sunset right now? Very good. That's my psychological profile, kind of like to Hubbard's point, whether or not in the matrix, whether you take the red pill or the blue pill, right? So just to get a sense of whether you're an optimist or a pessimist in this world, I personally believe that it is a sunrise. So I don't know the actual answer. I was hoping there was an engineer in here that could judge the shadows and determine whether it is sunrise or sunset. But hopefully, yeah, no doubt. So Energy Ventures, we are a private equity company. We've done venture capital investing in the past, but the reason we exist is because we think that right now it is certainly a supply crisis, not a demand crisis. Demand has been very consistent over many years. For oil and gas, we believe oil and gas will remain the main energy source for decades to come. And technology is the driver for extracting it in ways more environmentally friendly, more economic ways to be able to power the world. So that is really why Energy Ventures exists. We are technology investors in the oil field. And so what we do from a fund mandate, we're on our 5th fund right now. We're headquartered in Norway and have offices in Aberdeen as well as here in Houston. And our fund is $176 million right now. We have almost $1 billion under management. And all of our investments are in oil field services or product companies. We do not invest in E&P companies at all. And so in this current fund, we are investing in EBITDA positive companies. We've gone up the value chain, I guess, from early stage startups into companies that have proven products and generating EBITDA and revenue to reduce that risk as well. And so as far as what we look at all types of upstream and midstream investments as well. If there's a technology angle in it, we're interested in understanding it, learning it. We certainly believe in this environment, we've done our share of investing in high cost products that also deliver high value. High cost is not a very good recipe for success in this environment, so we are not really looking for high cost products regardless of what they deliver in the long run. It's more low cost driven. So the value proposition of the technology is certainly very important for what we look at. And then buy and build or differentiated strategies, that is certainly one of the things that we do if we can find a platform and then build upon it and then grow the EBITDA as well as bringing in technology. We think that technology drives a more valuable EBITDA multiple over the long run. So that's why we really want technology in all of our investments. So this is just a summary of our investments to date and segmented a little bit in 4 different buckets as far as how we look at the oil field. And then the top part are the ones that we've exited over the last, we were founded in 2002, so we've been around really for 15 years now. And the ones on the bottom that are the ones that are portfolio companies that are live. From a specifically natural gas perspective, one of the areas of interest is compression. We do have a early stage company called HiCore, which is quite interesting, wet gas compressor, new, somewhat game changer. And we've got a few co-investors, Statoil and Chevron, in that one as well. So that's from a natural gas, just one example from our portfolio, but that's really what we do. And I'd like to thank Uday as well, fellow Penn State graduate, as well for the opportunity.
All right, well, good afternoon. Certainly pleasure to be here. Doug Moorhead, President and Chief Technology Officer of FlexGen Power Systems, headquartered here in Houston, Texas, with our engineering facility up in Durham, North Carolina. As far as, and that's my car right there as well. No. Got our start 7 years ago, taking new technologies that we brought now to the oil and gas markets into the military markets, and then in 2015 sold that business to really focus exclusively on oil and gas, and now have actually diversified into some industrial power systems. So what we are as a company, we certainly are we're advanced power systems for upstream operations, drilling, production power, and oil and gas, to what we really call a hybrid power platform. The team is myself, Josh Prier, our CEO. We were Naval Academy classmates a few decades ago. In the room as well, Pasi Taimala, our VP of Engineering, to what we always say about really certainly advancing what has historically been on the technology side for oil and gas, kind of one of the last pieces of technology. I'll come back to that slide in a second. One of the last pieces of technology that really ever got much attention for operations, really, whether it's drilling, production sites, the operators will go out and size whatever they want to get done, drill the wells, they'll focus on the drill rig. And the last piece to really get, from an engineering perspective, from a product perspective, get size is the actual power system. And as Hayward mentioned earlier on, the digitization was a piece that if you asked me 18 months ago if we were going to be doing in a meaningful way, I probably would have said no. What we found out that in order to really kind of understand what was going on these drill rigs, on these production sites, you had to walk out there with a thumb drive, if that actually had a USB port on the operation, or a serial port, and actually download data off that site, very localized, from whether it's the pumping operation, the drill rigs. Walk back through the mud, drive back to your facility, download the data, put it in a database, and then do the analysis. There was no cloud-based, exported data, the analytics, the visualization to present it back to a customer. So that is a huge piece. What the digitization, IoT, what we all call it, presenting that information back to operators. One of the biggest challenges we see on the production site, on the power site, because without that information, a customer just can't make better decisions. They can't make better informed decisions, because that's what really all the digital piece enables you to have, a better informed, landscape of what's going on. At the end, we do power systems. We, slightly smaller than ABB as FlexGen, but in that power space, advanced electronics, integrating energy storage of different types with advanced electronics, with that control and that IoT platform. To come back, we are early stage. We may be the very last venture investment in oil and gas for quite some time. But backers, Altier Group out of Denver, our lead investor in that is limited partners, as shown here, EQT, Apache, Devon, Pioneer Natural Resources. In the same investment round, we brought investment from GE, their venture fund, as well as CAT's venture fund. We believe one of the first companies that both GE and CAT have ever co-invested in without problem. And again, what we do, our focus certainly was oil and gas, but as you can imagine, there's a number of industries out there, like oil and gas, remote power, high cost of power, high cost of energy, power quality problems. We spend a lot of time, behind the meter, what we call metered energy storage. A lot of pull into, energy storage plus PV. I know there's some questions about that earlier today. This ever-increasing challenge around flexible generation. As PV becomes more of a challenge, settlement periods in utility applications become less, and the more flexible an asset is as far as integrating different fuel types, as talked about here, different inputs, PV, renewables, gas generation, the more flexible and capable those resources need to be, and that's really what our technology is very geared towards. Some of our products, this is our first generation product that we fielded in 2015, right as the land drilling market was going to zero, as someone mentioned earlier. So it was a challenging time. What this product certainly enables is improved drilling on gas drill rigs, so power quality, transient power performance on all gas rigs, as well as biofuel rigs, land drill rigs that run on both diesel and natural gas. Very proven product to increase the fuel substitution rate of natural gas, as well as reduce the genset runtime on those assets. Our latest product, and again, these are full products that we do, full enclosures. The latest generation of software controls, voltage regulation, peak shaving, again, improved harmonics, all the problems at a very technical level that the industry struggles with. Longer term, our model is to not build these fully enclosed products, but to build more of obviously the software products. 70% of what we do from value is the software, but deliver the modules to customers like Schlumberger, who we have an exclusive relationship with on the production side. So for ESP operations, rod lifts, PCPs, and some others in artificial lift, we deliver those modules to them, and they are the service company. We're not an oil field service company. We're a technology product company to deliver to customers like Schlumberger. And the last piece, certainly around the asset management, the power control. I like to say that we have the Microsoft product for advanced power systems, whether it's running on, an ABB computer, a Siemens computer, an Eaton computer. We really have that platform that can go through lifecycle management and be that software platform for these advanced power systems that are so critical as they become, more prevalent in the smart generation space. I think that's it. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm a little bit of the odd duck refugee from the oil and gas industry. I was 20 years in oil and gas working on innovation. My last role was the president of Shell Technology Ventures here in Houston. Worked closely with Jim and with Doug, with a lot of other folks here in this room. But what I saw was that there's some fundamental changes going on, and if you want to be at the forefront of innovation, the next step is looking beyond the traditional oil and gas technologies. And I left and started a fund called Climate Impact Capital, which we're in the process of growing right now. But I think the key things I'll leave you on the introduction part is there's some interesting things that I noticed over 20 years in the business, and that is that even those of us who are experts and who've had more time than I have tend to miss the things that are complex. We tend to miss the nonlinear events. We certainly don't see the black swans, and very few people are able to catch the changes in the industry well before they happen, enough to make a significant monetization. And I think that's very clear that very few companies saw the change coming from fracking in such a way that they were able to hedge far enough out or see the depth and length of those changes. So what I'm right now looking at is to help investors understand, for long-term investing, how unexpected variance can affect your portfolios and affect your technologies. And in the early stage, and this is very similar to when you're building a refinery, you're looking for technologies that are going to be valuable over the next 15, 20, 30 years. And what we tend to miss is these non-linear changes in the environment. So where we see an opportunity for investors and for companies that are looking at technologies is to look far in the future and look for variance events tied to fundamental changes, whether it's coming from unexpected technology disruptions, or for where we're looking for variance events is unexpected changes in the climate situation, such as prolonged droughts, unavailability of water, very high heat index days, which are going to make certain types of technologies, whether it's in distributed or in centralized power and water, much more valuable in the long term. So we're out there trying to build out that capability, working with large companies, have real asset portfolios, as well as doing venture investing in early stage technologies.
So I was going to propose to have a few questions follow up so we expand the...
Last person's name and company, please.
Oh, sorry, Alex Rosenfeld, Climate Impact Capital.
What was the company?
Climate Impact Capital.
I was going to propose to have a few follow-up questions so we can expand on the topics and then do an open Q&A, see if you have follow-ups. I was going to touch base a little bit on Howard, the comment that you made about the use of information, right? And so my follow-up question on that was, how do you manage the conflict of interest between you, an OEM or provider of equipment and services, and the customer who owns at the end of the day the data and the process, right? How do you manage that? And on top of that, how do you cross the hump of, let's say in a refinery, you not only have ABB products, you have other competitors' products, and you're consolidating that information?
What these new platforms like Microsoft Azure and so on excels at is the ability to collect data from many different sources and accumulate literally millions of data points that can be analyzed and so on. The other question is really the big battle. That's what goes on now between ABB ability, between GE Predix, between Siemens and everyone, who is actually going to be the best one to take care of the data and provide the analytics, provide the services on top of it. Of course, we want to do that, and we recognize that others want to do. And this is going to be like a sign-on, like with Facebook or a mobile telephone operator and so on, who can get the most users, who can have the most income to develop the best solutions fast enough, who can get these things done. And who owns the data? Well, the customer owns the data about his plants. I mean, that is usually the viewpoint that he has in his cloud service. And he is likely to make that data available to the supplier that can provide, there is something that's ringing here, to the supplier that can provide the best insight or the best analytics on top of that. There has been a discussion whether or not it's owned by Cisco that provides the network, or ABB that provided the computer system, and so on and so on. I find that like dogs that fleas on a dog quarreling about who owns the dog. It's the customer who owns his plant.
So I was going to follow up with all you guys, if you could comment on how do you see the customer adopting these technologies, and I'll start with you. And why do you see that they're not more rapidly adopting, for example, information technologies like that?
Oh, I think there's a number of issues that I think all of us have seen, particularly around the poor and misallocation of risk and rewards between management and the field operators and the people who are aim to be coming in with these new technologies at the bottom level. So where I see it's being adopted is really right now is at the independents. They're feeling much more comfortable looking at these new technologies. Their people seem to be better rewarded, or at least they're not punished for trying anything new, while the larger players, everyone's kind of shivering in their boots about losing their jobs, not very much of an incentive to try things. So I think it's really going to be a question of a bit of time around as kind of the new generation of younger people come into the workforce with a great crew shift, and it's going to be adopted. It's just going to be the pace of change is different by company.
Two pieces I certainly comment upon. First, the digitization and who owns the data. I mean, I would say that it's a little bit of a, to use Alex's word, of a nonlinear event. That the data is absolutely a land grab right now, and not that you want to be selfish and not the end customer does own the data. That's absolutely right, but you don't want to exclude yourself as the cloud management of losing that data, because there's incredible value in it, even if you can't capture it all right now. And so you want to have a mutual relationship in that effort. And I would say, just as far as adopting new technologies, I mean, obviously the last 18 months have been a challenge, because as things are getting cut, incumbency has an incredibly more fortified position of just doing less of something that has historically worked. And that's a hard one to fight against. I mean, you have to clearly lay out, and we spend a lot of time with our customers, even now that we sell through some very established channels, understanding what that end value proposition of that customer is, and very clearly articulating that, and adjusting your product performance and price to meet that customer's needs.
Maybe I'll just add too that figuring out how much it costs to do it and to do the analytics is certainly another barrier, because it always seems that it's cheaper if you have all the data. But also comparing and contrasting different data analytic platforms against each other to say who's good and who's not good is a little bit difficult as well. So those are two of the hurdles that you've got to cross.
So one of the things that you guys mentioned was, and specifically you addressed the extending the life of the plant, or extending the life of a product or equipment. I will go one step further and ask you, when are we going to get to plant optimization, and how we can probably monitor or model how to operate and maximize profits out of all that data that you gather, right?
But I think many of us could show you how that works now. I mean, if you take the trip downtown to the George Bush Convention Center in 2 weeks, we will show exactly that for many different industries. How really you can get information in from the plant. I'm actually amazed at the things you can do now that you couldn't do even 5 years ago, in terms of analyzing the data and providing additional insight into instability, problem areas, and so on. And while I have the mic, I just wanted to say, if anyone thought I was talking about this as a sunset or sunrise industry, just to comment on that. It's a sunset industry for the guys who doesn't follow the change. It could be very well be an industry with 100-year potential for the companies that choose to be the sharpest and most profitable, and produce at least 60% of the energy that the world uses today is still going to be fossil in the foreseeable future, right? Just to have said that.
So Doug, I don't know if you want to add a little bit on that, and how you guys use your data to optimize the profitability of your customers.
Yeah, well, it's the way we present it back. What's interesting is, related to that, is that we went to one customer and we instrumented one of their production sites on the ESP site, and found that they had, in a given 24 hours, it was a well that produced, 800 barrels a day, and it was down for 6 hours and 26 minutes in a given day. Even at $40 a barrel, you can run those economics really quickly. What was interesting is that customer had all the same data once we got to work with them in their own database. It was buried, 6 layers deep, that they couldn't even get it out. And then what was interesting is even that sometimes once you even show that data to a customer, they don't want to believe it, because then they have to admit that they have a problem, and so that's a challenge. And so we obviously clarity presentation, clarity of data, unrefutable data is the number one thing that we always just try to present. So.
And for the two investment side, have you seen any company coming up with more the predictive analytics and going on, instead of the ESP reactive way, example, have you seen somebody already predicting that failure before it actually happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was at Shell, we invested in a company that did exactly that. They did predictive analytics for large rotating equipment failure based on getting very small, minute changes in equipment variations that previously were not available using, very deep algorithmic, deep data approaches. So I think that's happening. But I think the other interesting trend which I wanted to comment on is we are constantly talking about this big data and operational ability, because we look typically in this industry at large, complex type equipment and plants where you have lots of people, but that's not where, in my mind, a lot of the trend is going. The trend is going towards no operator, distributed technology. If you look at India and China, all these places, people are trying to come up with packages of solutions which you can put on site. There's not a single person there. Now, they will be very data packaged, and they'll be sending all of that information to a central facility, but there will be no person there, and the goal is for that facility to be running mostly on time and up throughout the year without any interventions. And you're beginning to see those types of technologies coming up. We're seeing especially those types of things coming out of Israel, and specifically targeting India in terms of wastewater treatment, standalone, fully operational wastewater treatment plants. Same thing on various small natural gas, on the natural gas side, in terms of natural gas processing equipment, plus even in terms of natural gas to liquids and other small plants, looking to find solutions that you can put in place, have a lot of sensors, but in essence, they are building them to be long-lasting pieces of equipment. And the sensors are there just in case something breaks down, but the goal is to build for very low maintenance operations, which is, I think, different than what a lot of what we're used to on the oil and gas side, is that you have people coming in and changing things all the time. This is, I think, a very different trend where there's a lot of opportunity. Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add that in the oil field, and big data is certainly the hot trend for as far as investment opportunities, and you see them showing up every day. And a lot of times it's folks that don't really know anything about the oil and gas industry that coming in and they've done it somewhere else, and they know that this is ripe for the picking because there's a lot of big data, and the industry's been running really hard and maybe not using all of that data that's out there. So figuring out an interesting way to do it without understanding the industry is somewhat difficult. So that's the challenge that we see from an investment perspective. And some show up with Silicon Valley backing. So their valuations are already inflated much greater than what we're generally used to. So that's another challenge, to figure out how to get them in and how to get them the help and the understanding of the oil field specifically to get it investable. But it's a lot less capital intensive than a lot of other things that happen in the oil field. So if you can find an investment opportunity that's not quite as capital intensive as building a mid-scale LNG or GTL plant, then that's attractive.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, I mean, we are coming from an industry which used to classify its RCM in like 5 different equipment categories, right? And then based on safety, hazard level, and so on, you would set service intervals based on that in a number of different categories. So you didn't even analyze each piece of equipment and what the maintenance strategy should be. So what we are doing now is, of course, to take it to condition-based maintenance, which is the first step of the way. You need to accumulate enough experience on that to be able to take decisions and make it predictive, because you want to specifically understand the failure mechanism. And we have some very interesting failure mechanisms here. If you'd like to hear about that, you can come to the OTC. I have a paper presentation there in 2 months. And then we can automate it with the bots to take the kind of decisions that, okay, we see this valve, the way it's behaving, and based on its signature, it's going probably to have a fault progression of this and this type, so we can wait 3 weeks. Then we automatically issue a work permit and a work order to change it. Because if we change it now, we will just disrupt the production, and based on the likelihood and so on. And then we can start to transfer those type of data between plants. That is probably 3 years ahead right now.
3 years?
Yeah, something like that. But because you have got to accumulate more of this equipment-specific data.
So we just mentioned that plants can be optimized with data. We also talked about that we can actually make more money with that. We talked a little bit about that we can predict failures and we can predict the optimization of that plant. I'll give an example of a power generation plant. Are we getting to the point where, like you said, these power plants are going to operate on their own? Are they going to actually operate on their own? And if that's the case, given that power plants get dispatched against a bid on the power market, can they actually be bidded automatically and suddenly optimize the whole bid market of that? I'll give you that. Sorry, if you want to comment.
Okay, so, I think to a large extent, all the renewable is operating on its own, right? So it already is, and I haven't built a natural gas-fired plant in a while, but I think they're pretty automated right now as well. So I think it's a natural trend, but I think also you need to look at the different markets. There's certainly some different shifts, and as you kind of go outside the primary markets in the U.S. and go to the more regional markets, and then you go outside the U.S., the value of automation, it becomes higher because expertise is harder to find. Even when you find it, it's not the same level, and the costs are higher. So there's a drive. So the major markets are not here in North America. This is a bad market to be in if you're trying to grow market share. The major markets are in the developing countries, and what's needed there is robustness and resilience to a lot of things that you don't typically find here. So I think that's where a lot of opportunities will be, and I think you'll find two things there. Certainly there's going to be large power plant growth, which will be similar to what we have here, but it'll be very, very very much integrated with new technology. But you'll also see this jump to a lot more distributed applications. So some of what Doug's company is doing, that type of technology is going to just leap over. Working with small natural gas power plants and other technologies into India and China and other places versus seeing large power plants which just can't be supported by the grid. And trying to give you a help here. So I think that's where the opportunities are. These really small packages, very full sensors, and you could just drop them in and connect them to the grid.
Yeah, I would obviously certainly agree. From a pure play technology perspective, certainly all that technology exists. The one of the great things about a power system is there's a lot of things that you can measure very clearly and cleanly: voltage, frequency, current. That it can be automated, and you can do all that. So I'd say absent political, country pressure, all the stuff, regulatory pressure we talked about earlier, that those plants can be automated, and that that human in the loop certainly can be removed. So.
I see that with the reduction in workforce as a result of the automation, where do you see the job growth for that workforce that has been replaced? Where would that go? And where the jobs?
You would cut me off. I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? For all manufacturing, for all industries, where are the jobs?
Right.
Because my daughter works at Google, and for sure they foresee that they will lay off a lot of the people who do more mechanical routine tasks about providing services and categorization and so on, and the bots are going to take over. I mean, when you talk with Elon Musk and his Teslas, you see entire plants manufacturing batteries without any people in them at all. So it's a question that, right? I mean, healthcare is an obvious answer.
I think I will just add a little bit on that, and I've been working lately on this space. So I like what Alex was mentioning before, which is with the new generation of people coming in and all these new technologies and more data analytics coming to the optimization space. I think that the shift is not going to be on if there are going to be jobs, more or less jobs. I think the jobs will be there, but it will be different jobs. I think it's going to be more on the analytics side, on more quantitative analytics, maybe algorithms, more, I think, math-related jobs and less maybe mechanical, if you want to put it that way. So, but I think it's going to be a shift of jobs, and I think, I'm not even sure. I have kids at school today, and I don't think that we're even today getting ready for that change. And it's not only affecting the oil and gas industry, right? It's affecting all industries. So it's even movie making. I happen to have my brother working at Microsoft, right? And he works in the media side. And there are scripts written today for movies that are written based on customer feedback and predictive analytics. Essentially, looking at what customers like, essentially moviegoers like to see in a movie, and they're writing the scripts that way. So it's kind of mind-boggling what's happening today in this space, and if you look at it from oil and gas perspective, it could be a world different, right? So I think it's going to be a shift of jobs, in my opinion. Okay, let's go here.
So, last comment you made that definitely human can be removed. I think I would say selectively human can be removed. Experiential knowledge you cannot replace it. So, meaning you want to preheat the pipes before you have when you start a boiler. Things like that. I think these are the things that. But the kids, as you mentioned, are so smart. If they know something is wrong, they can find that in microsecond what needs to be done, and they can do that. The second comment I would make is that the software engineering analytics. Okay, that's call it a predictive analytics, whatever you want to call it. But I'm talking about taking this experiential knowledge and coming up with the algorithm that suits that particular situation. Those two, combined with the software engineering and algorithm and the simulation, instant simulation, because you have to run the plant so many up and down, so many times, in that way, all conditions. Today, your big data, you can actually save all and zero in on where you are. But that's where the trend is going.
Yeah, just to explain a little bit, so, everyone has one of these. They're not repaired, right? I just got a new one. A little piece broke. They send it to factory. Robots take it apart. They melt the components, even the good components. They melt them and then they remanufacture them. There's not a person involved, and I think that's where a lot of things are moving to basically kind of solid state. You can't really fix them. You just, if someone comes in and puts in a component or not, at best you have someone slot in a component, and that's going to be a minimum wage job if it's not done by a robot. So I agree with the comment there. I have kids, and I'm very worried about whether they're going to have a job in the future.
I was just going to comment a little bit on what you said. We at ADI have been working on a premise regarding IoT, and one of the things that I've been proposed is the marriage of, if you look at what you just said on all the engineering side, software algorithms, even the simulation side of it, in a vacuum, it doesn't really make much sense. And one of the things that actually Microsoft has been having more trouble has been getting the process know-how. I call it process know-how. So when you look at somebody that is trying to do predictive analytics, ABB, GE, they have both the process and the ability to do all the algorithms and simulations, right? So I think the marriage of those two is what makes the little bump go away. So I don't know if you want to pass it along.
Well, the only thing I would on the job topic is, and I certainly agree with everything you said. I mean, I think back 50 years ago, and take Ford Motor Company had 0 jobs posted on their job board for software engineers. They probably had a lot of jobs out there for welders, and so probably 50 years from now, there won't be any jobs for welders, but there'll be 4,000 jobs for software engineers, you know? And so that's the piece. I mean, I think, and in that plant, I mean, you're absolutely right that expertise, there will always be application-based expertise that's critical for these industries. But that knob that someone runs down there and says, it's not hot enough, go turn it up. Like we got technology that can turn that knob, you know? It's the truth of the matter. And it's cheap, it's reliable, it's never hungover, it's never late for work, you know, it's always gonna be there and just.
But Doug, I doubt that today companies are relying without monitoring, right? Doing full automation. I don't know, I'll defer to you guys, but I haven't seen a refinery operate on themselves, right? Without somebody saying, okay, yes, it's red, we need to turn it off, maybe you press the button and it turns off automatically.
But part of it is culture.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
But maybe it's because we are in the oil and gas industry and we have had too well paid for our products.
Exactly.
Because I can tell you, if you are in pulp and paper, you did this in the 1970s with the QCS systems. Before that, they had people walking around the roll of the paper, knocking on it. So it says, dunk, 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 oh, so, and then they turn up a little bit to get the thickness up, right? In the 70s, that was replaced by automated systems. And in the metals industry, with the furnace controls and so on, and the cold rolling mill and the hot rolling mill, that type of technology was actually used in the 80s already for the ferrosilicium and the ultra clean silicium and so on. So actually, we are latecomers here. The others have been here before us.
Jim, why are we latecomers? Because you develop technologies or you fund technologies.
Yeah, and it's somewhat frustrating that we're latecomers. And I guess, so I'm 51 years old, so I've been through, I don't know how many downturns. This one, and I missed the one from whatever it was, 82 to 80. I came into the industry in 87, so that was kind of at the end of that downturn. And that's probably the one that's the most similar, but you hear about this one being fundamentally different, and the industry will come out of it fundamentally different. I tend to believe that it will be, but probably not quite as pessimistic as far as the oil price, but preparing for a very low oil price and the creative destruction that is actually occurring in the industry, I think ultimately will be very good for the industry. And it's forced us to make some changes, right? For the first time, where we didn't really have to do it before. Now we have to do it to survive, and a lot are not surviving, by the way, as we go through that. So that is the creative destruction that we're going to come out better than what we are, and those that don't adopt the automation will not be around to experience the next 20 years of bliss. Hopefully.
There's more questions. Go ahead.
Yes, a comment and a question. Rice University recently came out with a study, and the study shows that the average graduate today, during his 40-year career, will change careers 5 times. We're not talking about jobs, but change careers 5 times during that period of time. So it tells you about the mobility and what's happening in society. Question is, for those of you that handle venture capital funds, are they true venture capital funds in the sense that you deal with startups and you take them to a certain level and you don't take them to mezzanine financing, but you look to essentially sell out and recoup your investment? And I'm wondering what kind of timetable are you basically looking for in today with the kind of companies you invest in?
Yeah, oil and gas, I think, is a little bit different when you look at venture capital and venture capital that was founded in Silicon Valley. And that model of venture capital isn't really prevalent in the oil and gas. As a matter of fact, I did a presentation at the SPE Members in Transition a couple of months ago, and tied in the show Silicon Valley on HBO, which is a fabulous show. If you guys haven't watched it, I highly recommend watching that show, because it really tells the story of what venture capital is really like, and that's not what it's like in oil and gas at all. And I'd say at a very high level in venture capital, if you're investing in the Silicon Valley manner, you may invest in 10 companies and 3 of those die completely. 2 of them do okay, or 3 of them do okay, and then 4 are the shining stars, which are the Googles and Facebooks, and they deliver 500,000x ROI, while the other ones deliver 0. So the funds are incredibly successful. There are not a lot of those exits in oil and gas. So we, like the old Smith Barney commercial, we don't. We make our money, we earn it, and we have to earn every nickel that we get, and it's on valuations that are very real, that you've got to deliver the financial metrics in order to do it. So oil and gas, venture capital, right now, it's very hard. There's not a lot of players. The corporate venture capitalists are out there investing in, I guess, seed stage a little bit, not nearly as much as what they were before. Private funds, there's only a handful that you can go get seed stage money. And so it's a very difficult environment to raise capital right now. Like Energy Ventures, we moved out of that phase to more traditional private equity, where you've got earnings and you've got revenue, and it's all about scale. So that venture capital side, if you're trying to raise capital, very, very difficult to raise capital in this environment. If you have a good economic value proposition, you will raise capital. You'll find it, but you may go to angels, you may go to some corporations, maybe 1 or 2 venture capital funds, or maybe some Silicon Valley funds that dip their toes into oil and gas. But that's really it's a difficult environment.
But you in particular, you're not doing venture capital anymore?
We're not doing venture capital anymore. Venture capital meaning, in my definition of that would kind of be like pre-revenue companies or pre-earning companies for sure. We've done a lot of pre-revenue companies in the past and pre-earnings with revenue, but not anymore.
Yeah, the capital markets right now have moved away to what's called kind of capital light. So it's anything that doesn't need CapEx in it, so a lot of IT, and everyone is really trying to, or moving to, if it's capital heavy, it's more around growth finance, so post-earnings or projects. So there's plenty of good projects going around, midstream, in the oil and gas side of midstream. There's lots of midstream projects going around, some power stuff, especially on renewables, lots of interesting renewable plays. IRRs depend on how good you are, in the 7 to 10%, maybe in the low teens for some of these project-related investments. But right now, very difficult to raise money for any companies, or in my sense, for raising money for the fund. Everyone is very, has been scared away. But for those of you who are in a large company, such as with ABB and others, this is surely an opportunity for those who have the long enough vision to say, everyone stepped out. Now's the time to come in and play the long game. The challenge is that there are very few corporates who are able to play the long game. And when I say the long game, you need to invest, have the money to kind of stick it through about a 15-year period. So you need to kind of have a 15-year plan. And the problem is that on the corporate side, is that corporates typically have a change of management every 3-4 years, and that doesn't work out. The only way I've seen kind of really successful is you need to have a fund that's separately managed, carve out the money, and and find ways around doing that. But it's a tough place to be. But if you have money right now, if you're in a corporate environment, it's a good time to be investing if you can figure out how to ensure that the company and the technology gets enough money to survive to the time where it's in post-earnings, at which point you can go and find more traditional investors for it.
You really want to flip capital every 3 to 5 years is really, our fund is 10 years. A lot of them have been 8 years plus 1 plus 1. One of our funds actually had a couple extensions, so that's too long. Investors would like their money back quicker than that.
3 times in 3 years.
Yeah.
So I'll go there in the back and then come back to you.
I want to come back to a comment you made a few minutes ago about the adoption rate, how oil and gas industry has successfully provided adoption of advanced technologies, which were adopted by Southern countries in the 70s and all that. So I guess the question is, oil and gas as well as the broader energy industry, do you see a fundamental shift in current environment where the rate of adoption of technology, especially IoT and all that, I think they are fundamentally changing and it's beyond the lip service. You know, we get together and sing Kumbaya and like, oh, this is such a great thing, you should do it, but then in oil and gas, it's very slow. It's one of the worst industries when it comes to adoption of technology.
You answered your own question.
So, but the question is actually storage. The question is now, if you have a visibility that there is a fundamental shift actually in a positive direction for adoption of technology.
I can comment on that if you want. I have a particular vision on how the investment community in the oil and gas industry works. So I worked for GE in M&A doing investments, and for me, I think that the biggest beneficiary of new optimization and technologies coming out, in my opinion, are the operators. And I see Shell Technology Ventures, for me, was a good idea, and I don't know if they continue to do that fund, but like Chevron has their own fund, and BP used to have their own fund, and I think if they're not pushing, if the operators are not pushing the boundaries and stretching for new technologies to come in, which is where the money relies. The OEMs actually don't make that big of a margin to be able to invest in risky technologies, right? So a few like ABB or you would go to GE, they have the shoulders to sustain that, then yes, you might see some of that. But I still think that, like what Jim was saying, where high risk, this is not Silicon Valley, right? So high risk technologies that are not adopted fast enough, and really the operator does not want to risk their production to new technologies, unless they're funding that technology investment, I don't see that coming through. So I think a little bit relies on the operators are actually pushing the boundaries to get into that space.
I have a comment on that. So the liquefaction unit that you saw me present, we actually brought that unit online from Houston. So that unit was sitting in Pennsylvania. We started that unit from Houston. But there's regulatory issues. So even though we can do it, that unit goes to Canada. Yeah. It's still got to be manned. So there's hurdles there. They're short term, but
you had another question, right?
Yeah, I was just going to recap on Howard, you were talking about who does the customer choose for their analytics, and I think Jim, you said whose data is it anyway, or who's best in class, for example, of all the analytical or cognitive or predictive kind of companies, and I guess lastly, I think you were talking about your iPhone, so I'm going to circle all that together and say, what are you looking for? You're looking for an independent integrator to do all of that for you. Someone who can do all of that.
So I'll tell you what I've been working on specifically that. I've seen more of from the customer perspective, the operator. If you go to Chevron and Exxon, they would probably prefer that, like somebody that is agnostic to the technology, that does not really own the technology for their own benefit, but really they own it to benefit the customer. They can produce and replicate. Almost, I would go to the consulting industry where you absorb an enormous amount of data and then you reproduce and communicate that to your customer. I think that that is, I think from a customer, more of the preference, and from at least my experience in the OEM side, what I've been struggling most when trying to sell that type of service to the customer. They don't really want me to optimize my turbine to then actually sell it at an upgrade, right? Because I learned everything from their process, right? So I think that's a little bit of the conflict. That's why I asked the conflict of interest there, but no? I think you want to talk.
Yeah, I had another comment as well. Now, I just hope this is going to be open and transparent, so that may the best provider win. All attempts of lock-in here has a tendency to degrade performance and slow technology development. And just I was thinking about my own earlier comment about technology in the oil and gas industry. Of course, there has been tremendous technology development in the oil and gas industry. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if the CEO sits there, who sits here? Reservoir, geology, drilling, well, facility, HR, right? The control and optimization, the electrical, the white disciplines, they have, if they are at the table at all, they sit at the other end. And that is totally different if you are a metal company or a paper company where energy is such a big cost factor for them. That was what I meant. So the innovation has been in the areas that are high on the table and less on the areas that are low on the table. And that is different for some other manufacturing industries, for instance, like cars with robotics and things like that. I need to give this away.
It must be you, yeah. And as a geophysicist, I'm one of those guys that are pushing those automation folks down to the end because I'm trying to save my own job, right? I mean, it's the truth, is it? And you see that a lot in the industry as far as the adoption rate, is that there's a level of protection of your own job. This is what I do, and if I adopt these technologies to get rid of my job, I no longer have a job. So it's human nature to do that, which is quite unfortunate in some cases because it should be looking at the overall whole and allowing that creative destruction to occur regardless. So it's a challenge to get technology adopted, that's for sure. But if you have a product in this environment today that is lower cost, then everybody will listen to you. If you can save them cost on the front end, and it either maintains performance or improves performance, then you can get an audience and they'll adopt the technology, is what I've found in our portfolio companies. If you have to make an argument that it's higher cost, but you're going to get a well that increases EUR, for example, good luck on that sale. If you're on an increasing EUR sale with maybe a little incremental increase in your original upfront costs, it's not going to happen.
You said the oil companies don't say, well, where's the previous 2 installations that are operating?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, and that's also a very important part of it, you know, having that track record.
But actually, the small and miners are more likely to look at this now.
Yeah.
They have their head full of lean, and they are more likely to be the fast early adopters than the big ones.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and you look at Schlumberger, and they publish their, I think it's the 5-year, the revenue from technologies that have been introduced in the first 5 years, and that's growing, right? I mean, it's growing in today's environment. So their new technologies are getting adopted at a faster rate, at least in a revenue percentage perspective. And we see that in our portfolio company too. But ultimately, that adoption of new technology is what's going to drive the gains going forward. So you've got to be able to convince your client that it is good.
Okay, I'll just ask for a big hand for the panel here.